Hello, folks. My name is Ken Briota. I am the editorial director for IoT Evolution, and you are here in our next webinar, which is 4 reasons to build your own IoT solution or not. You will be getting to that in just a moment. I just want to explain a few housekeeping things before we get started. If you have questions throughout the session here, you'll see a Q&A button on your interface there. Feel free to type in your question and send it in. We'll be doing our live Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please send in your questions as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as we can near the end. Also, the presentation will be archived, and you'll be able to go back and refer to it again as you tell all your colleagues about all the stuff that you learned as you went through today. That, I think, is all of the housekeeping that we need to hit before we get started. There are basically 2 main questions that you need to face when you're looking to do a new IoT implementation. Are you going to build your own, or are you going to buy off the shelf? And in this session, we're going to answer that question for you with the help of our featured presenter, John Keever. He's the CTO and founder of Telit IoT Platforms. And John, I'm going to let you take over here in just a moment. Folks, welcome to John Keever.
Thank you, Ken. I'll go ahead and get started here this afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever your geospatial location has you at this point in time. What we're going to do over the next 30 to 40 minutes is basically reflect on all the things that need to come together to effectively deploy and implement an IoT platform. As Ken said, the question is always, is it make versus buy? Does it make sense for us to try to do this in-house, or should we consider doing something beyond that? So let's take a look here at what we do. This is Telit. As Telit, many of you may very well know the company. Been in the cellular module business for a number of years, in excess of 15 years focus on IoT. Basically, we're the largest pure-play IoT provider in the world. We've got over 1,100 employees that wake up every day focused on working in and solving problems within the IoT domain. Over 7,000 different customers that deploy our technology. And I guess if you look at the years of development and research we've got invested, it's in excess of 2,500. But the main thing here is this is what we do. Each day it's what we focus on. It's our bread and butter, whether you're looking at the communications modules themselves, if you're building a board, or you're looking at the connectivity plan that needs to be global if you're deploying solutions worldwide. The platform infrastructure, that we're going to be talking about today. As you pull the information together, how do you manage that at the device level and at the platform level, as well as, obviously, with the years of experience, we have the know-how to do that. I often say that you really don't know how to do something until you've done it a couple of times, and making mistakes is often the best teacher. So it's that know-how that comes from the experience that I think is very valuable to our customer set as well. If you take a look classically at what makes up an IoT platform and why you might want one, there's many ways to onboard data from a device or an endpoint into a cloud platform, whether it's a small-scale solution with a few hundred endpoints, or literally a large scale where you have hundreds of thousands of endpoints. But what happens as you start putting these solutions together is you start having to take on lots of different responsibilities. Am I just collecting data, or am I publishing outbound to some type of dashboard infrastructure or some type of enterprise application solution, or possibly am I publishing to another cloud platform to do specific operations, maybe big data analytics and what have you. So you need to take all of these things into consideration, as well as the connectivity involved. Am I going to be running over a wired infrastructure, a wireless infrastructure? Is it cellular? Is it Wi-Fi? All of these, is it LoRa? All of these different type of discussions and decisions have to be had in the context of what is an IoT platform, and why should we consider purchasing one versus building it. If you take a look at the different things that go together to make that up, you think of connectivity. How do we really get the data from one point to the other, and how do we manage that once it's in place? The terms of device management, one of the things most often overlooked as people go about building their own solution. They don't think about the fact that if something goes offline, how are they going to recover that 1,000 miles away, many times until it's too late. The concept of data management, once you start collecting the data, it typically doesn't stop. It continues to roll in, and then you have to worry about all the IT back-end challenges of how do we grow that, how do we scale in an elastic manner to allow additional data to be captured in support of the solution. Administration and security, as we get through the presentation today, I think you'll find that that's one area that is very, very critical, more so than ever in terms of the constituents. Security is probably the single biggest issue we have facing us in IoT in the context of doing something to slow down the movement and the kind of the momentum that we have in the business today. If we had a significant breach that was publicly exposed, that was a concern to many of the executives. Obviously, their IoT focus may not be as strong, so we want to make sure that things are secure. And oftentimes, as people pull things together to build their own, that's one of the last things they think about. So we'll be talking about that as well as we go through. And of course, finally, the real value of IoT, isn't so much the context of collecting the data, it's what you do with it once you have it. Classically, IoT is a means to an end. It's how do we connect those endpoints, how do we acquire that data, and how do we get it where it needs to go in a timely manner so that we can make a decision on it to better run the business toward profitability and success. So that's obviously a very important ingredient in any solution that you're working on. Now, the basic platform concept is to work to normalize this. Rather than having all of these spaghetti connections running from one point to another, many times having duplicate support from a software perspective, from a management perspective, the cloud platform works to normalize that for you. So it pulls those features such as connectivity management, device management, etc., into a centralized location. And regardless of how you may be onboarding the data, whether it's directly at a module level on a board, or you may be using a low-level API, or at a gateway level where you may be aggregating a number of sensors that are in some type of on-premise location back into the cloud, or even moving parts, telematics, heavy equipment, highway-based types of devices that are all focused on location-based service technology. Pulling all that information together into a centralized management location, allowing you to manage not only the connections and the devices, but the data as it scales as well. And then looking to the right side of this slide, the whole concept of then acquiring the data and making it of value to you, whether it's simply viewing it or passing it on into a back-end enterprise platform solution for analytics and again, decision making on behalf of your company's requirements. So what we're going to be talking about as we move forward is, if you take off, and again, all of you that are in attendance today, you're probably at different places in your IoT deployment. So there's, no one single location that we're going to be talking about. We're going to really be talking about kind of the end-to-end activity. But there's always the question, do we make it or do we buy it? And that's what we're really going to focus on here. So let's continue to move on as we, think through this. I mean, clearly, the concept of software is always underestimated. I don't know a single IT manager or a single developer who ever, exceedingly overestimates the work in building a system. Everyone has the, best, concepts in mind, and you typically think about the garden path that if everything works well, then we can get these functions together pretty quickly. But it's all of the other things you have to deal with in terms of the error handling, recovery, when things don't go correctly, that most of your time is spent in the development and test and maintenance cycle. So to start with, as you go about building your stuff, you have to worry about the time it's going to take, the time that you're going to invest in building the plumbing or the infrastructure versus focusing on your application and what really brings value to your company. And secondly, the costs associated with it and the development and the building of it is usually just the tip of the iceberg. It's where you get started. Also, since most companies, that are focused on building a product or a solution aren't in the business of building platforms, they have the challenge of risk and complexity because it's typically something that they don't do every day. It's something that they're doing in support of their end goal in business. So those are the types of things you need to be thinking about as you move toward that make versus buy decision. Is where is our time best used? If we're going to invest precious money and resources that we have, where are we going to focus that? So let's take a look at using an IoT vendor. Instead of doing that make, let's consider the option of buying. If we go in and take a look at some of the things that you'd expect when you're going for selection of an IoT vendor is, do they have the connectivity that we need? Do they have the ability to support wired and wireless? Is it cellular? Is it satellite? All the different connection modes that you may have. From the standpoint of data, how large can they scale? How much data do they support? And is the data model flexible in the event that I redefine what I need? How hard is it to make that realignment in the platform? Device management is critical, and that's really one area I think that most people, as I said earlier, always overlook. And it really, device management means different things to different people, but we're going to get into that deeper as we go through the presentation. But I think, you'll appreciate that a little bit more, when we talk about what does device management mean to you, specifically in the context of your solution. Administration security, we'll dive into that a good bit. And then, of course, once you have all this good infrastructure in place, how does it integrate? Is that going to be another large cost associated with making that part of your solution to get value out of it? The biggest thing you want to consider when you're looking at an acquisition of a platform is the fact that it does lower your cost to start. Can you start small and grow? Is there a major cost up front, or are you able to do what we call crawl, walk, run, where you can start with a lower cost system, kind of get a feel for what's going on and then be able to grow as your business requires it. And then, of course, I would say more importantly than anything from a business perspective is the concept of time to money. How quickly can we get to market, 18 months, 24 months to build our own concept of a platform, the ability to get started much quicker than that with a pre-existing, IoT platform. So let's continue onward. Okay. One of the biggest things that we see when people are, working, within their own context of a solution is they get things started, they put the system in place, and then they realize that, gee, we didn't think about the fact that the number of devices that we're supporting has a lot to do with the amount of effort it takes to maintain this. As data starts to come in, you have to expand your, data storage infrastructure. As the devices become more plentiful, then you have to worry about the management of them when they go offline. How do we recover them? And what we often see as customers do that is kind of a magic number in the area of around 4,000 to 5,000 seems to be that magic number that people hit, that they basically say, okay, I need some help. This is something we've seen over and over again, and I don't know if that's a standpoint of scalability or just the raw device management challenge that they have, but that number seems to be a common one. And some of our best customers are customers that went down the path of developing their own and got into it and realized if we continue forward, the model that we've used is going to simply be a significant burden on resource and cost, and continue to grow server farms based upon the model that they choose to deploy with. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Sometimes we have proof of concepts that are larger than 5,000 endpoint devices. So, we have to have that scalability and capability to grow as the customer needs to. Now, when we take a look at that inflection point, there's got to be what we would typically consider the pain points, the maintenance of it, the management of the risk, are things going offline and we don't even know it, and of course the fact that now my whole IT department may be consumed in keeping infrastructure running, rather than focusing on developing applications and analytics that could take advantage of the data to run the company better, run the business better. So those are the kind of things we're going to dig into a little bit as we proceed with our discussion on the platform buy. So if you take a look at the make focus, okay, you're going to spend a lot of time on your fixes versus innovations. We're going to be repairing the plumbing. We're going to be, figuring out how to address the device software for the next version that behaves better in the field. Versus, allowing ourselves to focus on how could we use the data better. And I think if you net it all out, it really comes down to the fact that you're in more of a survival mode rather than a mode where you're growing and thriving. And that's obviously one of the challenges that you may have, if you choose to take the path of going it alone. Similarly, if you take a look at where your money and your time is spent, I think that more often than not, what you're going to find out is, if you have this precious resource, whether it's physical dollars, whether it's physical resource, and the time associated with it, more often than not, it's going to spend largely in that maintenance. I mentioned earlier that many times the development of the system is the tip of the iceberg. What you really find with any software system, but especially one in the scale supporting a large-scale IoT implementation, is that the cost of the development is just the starting point. There's a large cost of maintenance. Software takes on a life of its own, and it's never ending. You're continually having to support the next set of protocols, so then the next set of integration capabilities, the next set of requirements that may come in from a future project that you have. So rather than, focusing your money there on maintenance and stuff, the capability to have the platform allows you to shift that investment, those precious resources and the time, into the area of addressing your business needs. And that obviously, from most business perspectives, would be a wiser use of the investment of the resources, I think. So what we want to do as we go through this is talk about the benefits of a platform. How does this come together? How does it specifically benefit you, the customer? Deploying that solution rather than building it, for yourself. So let's take a few minutes and talk through that. Clearly, when you buy a platform, it has to have some form of built-in maintenance. When you start looking out there in the marketplace, if a system doesn't have provided maintenance for some kind of platform as a service fee, then it may not be something you want to adopt. It's very important that the builder of that system maintain it and run it. Many people may want to acquire a platform and run it in their own operations center, but that vendor had better be at your side to make sure you have the support that you need moving forward. Agility and scalability. I think one of the biggest things that you benefit from by using an IoT platform is the economy of scale that you get, because most likely if it's a large, a significantly successful IoT platform vendor, then they're going to be addressing the needs of many, many different customers with many, many different requirements. And that, of course, gives you a leg up as you change and you expand and build out your IoT-based solutions. So the ability to be agile, the ability to scale is very critical. And of course, it goes without saying, risk management, managing the risk so that as you move forward, that you have a partner there with you. You're not on your own, going at your own. You have that partner, in the travel and the journey as you move forward. So very important to have that fellow traveler to help with the risk and managing that. Now, one of the most important things that you're going to deal with, as we go on, is the fact that you're going to have to address the maintenance from a standpoint of what does that really mean. You're going to be, having, updates and patches and all that need to be applied. Many times these, can be scheduled and orchestrated effectively so that you minimize downtime and avoid costly offline data, or possibly having to actually get physically engaged with the endpoint device. An effective platform is going to have well-managed managed, firmware over-the-air updates, application over-the-air updates, as well as the capability to do more than that. You may need the capability to do endpoint configuration dynamically, the capability to even change, rate plans of end devices if you're in a cellular infrastructure, simply due to the fact that you're in the process of pushing out firmware updates for any given month, and you want to be able to avoid costly overages in the data plan. And what we would recommend is that you look for a platform that has the capability for campaigns so that you can effectively define a campaign, orchestrate a campaign, when will it run, for what area or segment of the country that you're particularly, focused on at that given point in time. So these are the types of things that, are very important, in putting that solution together. Another very important thing is, of course, the agility and scalability that you need to do that. Device integration, many times it's very easy to say, well, I understand it, that we have competent IT resources. An endpoint device is basically a data source. It's going to connect to my network. It's going to publish data to my network. And I don't see why that's any different than applications that we build, with users associated with it, every day of the week. The big challenge there is the fact that a few things are working against you. Most of those devices are unattended. They don't have a human at the endpoint that knows how to reset it or power cycle it when it happens. Secondly, those devices many times, are dependent on specific signals out in the field, and if there's a need, to be able to remotely access that, you don't have the capability to pick up the phone and call that individual to look at what the state of it is. And then, of course, the whole concept of application integration. The benefit of IoT is to get timely data where it needs to go to make timely decisions. So we want to make sure that agility and scalability is in place. And then also the reference here is also to separate drivers from the devices and applications. One of the things that we see being one of the largest, stumbling points for building your own IoT platform is the whole concept of protocols, whether you're creating your own protocol or using a common industry standard protocol. At the end of the day, you have to make that last 12 inches of connection from the gateway to the device, that endpoint, whether it's a sensor, whether it's intelligent logic controller, and then you get into the whole world of industrial IoT with robotics, conveyors, vision systems, etc. The ability to speak those native protocols is critical. And here again is a decision point. Do you want to take the time to develop those yourselves, or do you want to build on a platform that already provides rich support for these types of things? These are many of the hidden challenges that people don't think about when they start down that path of deploying their own IoT solution and framework. So what we want to do is take a look at risk management. Okay, how do we lower those upfront costs? Okay, we're not basically going to have to go build our own, from scratch. We're going to be able to build off years of experience that someone else has invested and experienced in getting where they are. The fact that it's proven, you're not the only person on that path. You have other fellow travelers that are using the system to solve their problems as well. And then, of course, a dedicated support team is critical. The ability to, pick up the phone, make a call, and talk to somebody who, understands the system possibly a little bit more from the inside out than yourself, so that you're not dependent upon your particular IT team to have to burden that, or shoulder that burden, I should say. And again, most platform vendors are going to be able to prove that. They're going to have references that they can provide to you. They're going to be able to show different solution sets and use cases where their platforms have been used. And some platforms are stronger in certain domains than others. If you take a look at many of the analysts' writings today, they estimate there's between 300 and 400 different IoT platforms out there. But clearly, when you peel the onion back, you realize that a lot of those platforms are very special purpose and very focused. Many times, customers need something a little bit more flexible than that can deal with a number of different problems and different types of endpoint devices, as well as feeding different types of enterprise solutions on the back end. So these are all factors that you want to take into account. when you're looking at your selection of a platform. Let's take a look at device management a little bit more in depth for a few minutes. We talked about it, the fact that as the devices, multiply and the system starts to roll out, what you see happening is your problems multiply. And the whole concept of the fact that you may have a linear increase in the number of devices over time, that doesn't mean that the challenges that you're going to have are going to be linear. Many times you're not only dealing with the connection and the endpoint issues that you may deal with on a per device basis, you're dealing with things back in the cloud platform about how well is the protocol, ingression or ingestion being handled, how is the data being handled. So your problems many times are actually, non-linear. They're more, I wouldn't say exponential, but you have a lot more to do with and just worrying about, okay, I have a device issue with firmware. You may have security issues. You may have functionality issues. All of these types of challenges, come together as you start to lay out and deploy functional, IoT solution infrastructure. One of the biggest challenges that everyone, has in the IoT domain is effectively minimizing the need to go physically touch that device or execute what we always generally refer to as a truck roll, where people physically have to go, to a location, get inside of the control box, up to the gateway or sensory device that's there and physically connect to it and make changes or swap it out. And this is very interesting. We've worked with companies that literally their whole success or bankruptcy was dependent upon avoiding, costly truck rolls, simply because when you start to roll out a platform and you get, into the thousands of endpoint devices, that's a significant cost if you're going to have to, go and deal with field technicians and addressing those devices on a one-by-one basis. And another major concern is, of course, extended downtime. The fact that when a device isn't publishing data or data isn't being acquired, most likely the customer that you're selling to isn't going to be very interested in paying the bill. And so it's very critical to take these things, into account and work, to minimize them as you're doing your development. And I mentioned a while ago that, that the whole concept of truck rolls in a large scale can be not only, a killer for your business model, but a killer for your business. So that's something that you want to take into account as well. And it's not that, people have ill will or want to see the failure. It's just that a simple mistake in the edge device software and the cloud-based software could put you in a situation that requires it, and you have to, bear that burden. As far as maintenance requirements, some of the things that people typically end up having to do more in retrospect than a proactive move is the whole concept of provisioning and authentication. People think that, well, my cell phone was easy to pick up at the store and get authenticated and provisioned. I didn't have much trouble with that. How are my devices going to be differently? And if you've ever worked with, unmanned devices that are basically being put in the box, shipped out to customers, plugged in and turned on, they need to be able to work. You can't, sit there on a one-by-one basis and help walk them through how does it connect to the network, how does it, get authenticated, and how does it start to publish data or receive commands. That just has to happen in a very seamless manner. So those are the kinds of things we want to talk about, next as we move on to the presentation. Is these are things you need to think about. Device configuration. Once that device comes to life, it has possibly custom characteristics that need to be configured for take on its specific personality. Does the system have the capability to do that when a device comes online for the first time, to then dynamically, pass that configuration down to the device and bring it online? Monitoring and diagnostics. How long has the device been online? When was its last update? When did it last publish? Or how long has that device been offline? What were the last commands or data that we received from it? All of these types of things are critical to an overall successful IoT deployment. Software maintenance and update. You're going to have them. I don't know that I've worked with a single vendor, in the last 15 years that hasn't had to worry about software maintenance and update. And we're living in a very interesting time of digitalization too. Products that would historically not have been digital in nature, are swiftly becoming highly intelligent with their own microcontrollers and sensory frameworks embedded, and all of those types of devices need to be connected and maintained. As you go through the maturity life cycle of that product or that device, there's going to be updates. How does it operate better? How does it provide better torque, acceleration, speed, all the things a device may need to do. Those types of things are going to be needed moving forward as well. Talked about provisioning and authentication. If you're not familiar with that, many times people just assume an IP connection at the endpoint. My device is somehow going to connect and we'll move data back and forth like we always have, and that's understandable. If it's your first time out, then that's going to happen. But what you really have to understand a lot more than that. The connection to the network, the validation of the identity of the device. What type of network infrastructure am I working with? If I'm moving, do my signals change? Does my registration change? If I go into a tunnel or under a bridge, do I lose connection? How do I collect data and then dynamically reconnect, reestablish, and get that information back up into the system? These are all details that many times are overlooked simply because if you're building your own system and going down that path for the first time, it might be something you haven't thought about. Hopefully the IoT vendor that you select to do business with will deal with these types of issues, every day, because that's one of the focuses of IoT, is to be able to support that endpoint connection in the most, highly and high integrity as possible. So that's one thing you may want to consider as well, especially if you have devices that are moving. From a standpoint of device configuration, making sure that devices are updated when they need to be and done properly. In the event that you lose connection during that update, how do you recover? Does the device have the intelligence to automatically roll back and restart itself so that it can reestablish connection and get to a known state? Or does your network have the capability, if a connection's lost, to know where you last transferred and pick back up and move on from there? These are all critical features. And being able to set unique parameters. And one of the things I referred to is that restore point. As you develop your endpoint software, your edge application, having the ability for that device to recover on its own. You have to think in terms of very autonomous nature to be able to get that information to the endpoint reliably. And then monitoring and diagnostics. It's interesting. Logging is one of the most critical things you have as a developer when you're first putting your code together, and many times there will be different types of logs as the maturity of the product exists that are kept, some of which are not, but knowing when to log. Do you have the capability to keep a bit of log at the edge device so that if you do have an exception, you can transfer, basically transmit that at that point and then be able to see a failure state or how you got it into a failure state? The ability to then effectively download those logs and dumps and analyze them with offline tools so that you can better understand exactly what happened in the context of my network, exactly what happened in the context of my device. These are all very important facilities and features of an IoT platform to keep in mind from a standpoint of maintenance. And then, of course, when we go about that update, how do we go about addressing those vulnerabilities and adding those new features? You're going to have them, the ability to run an app at the endpoint to possibly update not only the application but the firmware associated with it, and then being able to do that in a scheduled and managed framework is important. The capability to do version level control of the software that you're deploying, to be able to what units are updated, what units are not updated. And many times, the world is not perfect. We have different versions of software and firmware, all over the place. Some customers want immediate updates. Some customers only want updates when they are ready for updates, and some customers don't want updates at all. So you get into challenges where you're trying to maintain that infrastructure, and you need a system or platform that's flexible enough to allow you to do that, and also to alert your customers, if they aren't following a best practice on how to keep the device and the platform running, when to get involved and help them, to, I guess, protect them from themselves. Now, one of the most important things that we want to talk about here is security and what is an acceptable level, because that means different things to different people in almost every context. Those of you who have been in this domain for a long time know that many times, in the past, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, it was something that we talked about, but we didn't necessarily put a lot of focus on deploying. But I would say that I haven't dealt with a single IoT solution the last several years that security probably wasn't the top of mind, highest metric of importance, mainly because when we look at the world that we live in today, lots of unique devices, unique users. If you're going to have a cloud platform to manage all of these, you've got to anticipate the vulnerabilities of it, and more than ever, you've got to be able to have, formal device identification and authentication when a device comes online, so that the device that you believe is there is actually the device that's there as you put that together. Simple things, denial of service, spoofing the capability to do man-in-the-middle and intrusion is kind of commonplace. But when you get into more complex situations where people will be aliasing devices and things of that nature, you want a framework where you have some form of immutable identity, where you can identify that that is no longer the device that it claims to be, and effectively blacklist that device on the fly. These are the types of features that you want to consider as well when you're looking for a mature and scale platform, because at the end of the day, it's your business that's depending upon this, and you want to make sure you have the integrity that you need to support that. Many times, we look at three-factor authentication, the ability to know what is there, something, and then of course all the different authentication parameters you may pass, but data validation is critical as well. Do we have the level of integrity that we need? Many times, people say, well, I'm running on a secure socket, I have SSL encryption, but in some scenarios that we deal with, we have multiple levels of encryption simply due to the critical nature of the intellectual property that's being moved through that connection, has to be protected. So those are the types of things that you want to look for. Do you support a trusted environment, not only at the hardware level in the device, but back in the cloud as well? And we have, obviously focused on that for many years with Intellit, and we're still making significant investments there to make sure that our platform is as secure as possible and has the capability to provide that trusted environment for our customers. As we move forward, another thing that comes into the context of security is another dimension that really is often an afterthought as well. Once you put security in place, if that security isn't adaptable to the framework of the business, then you're probably going to have changes as well. Companies usually have single sign-on infrastructure, managed domains, things of that nature, and you need to be able to plug and play with that so that people working with the system have, that common sign-on. They're not having to maintain multiple passwords, because very simply, many times they end up getting shared, and that obviously directly leads to security breaches. So the ability to have a framework that's adaptable, the ability to have devices that are immutable, and then the capability to have authorization at multiple levels is critical as well. So these are all the types of things that you might want to be looking for in your particular IoT platform selection. And again, we have to acquire data in many ways. One thing that we see with IoT is there is no single solution for any those protocols. The capability to have secure data transfer even at the sensor level is many times important. Oftentimes we deal with customers that say, well, I don't understand why it's so important to have a secure data stream for my sensors. It's just temperature data, humidity data, soil moisture data, things of that nature. But the real exposure there isn't the fact that someone might be able to see your data. The exposure there is that they might be able to take advantage of that to send other, command infrastructure and all into your system, in a negative manner. So you want to avoid that, avoid data corruption and then introduce those security vulnerabilities. And another area is, of course, security zones, being able to identify boundaries where information can flow and can't flow, being able to identify the source of the information, as an authenticated source point. And again, I mentioned end-to-end encryption. That's critical, flowing from the sensory level all the way through to, not only the cloud platform, but into on-premise infrastructure as well. Security at every level is mandatory in most IoT implementations of today. I referenced trust in the environment a while ago, and I know that there are many chip vendors providing, trust technology, and that's important to build upon. It's a good thing that it's there because it makes it easier for the developers to embrace it as they're building the new devices. So trusted platforms are very important, the capability to have that integrated, and of course the capability to use those in support of standards, being able to identify how you perform, how you police your standards, and validate that the proper steps are being taken from the standpoint of recovery and incidents reporting and things of that nature. Very important. And things like ISO 27001 are helping us to build better systems by putting those guidelines and requirements in place. And many times, we deal with customers of many and constituents of many different walks of life, everywhere from children with child trackers to industrial infrastructures where you have robotics and data, and there's always a concern of, is the cloud safe? And that really is on a solution by solution basis. I would say that the cloud is far safer than most people give it credit for, as long as people are doing their job and making sure the infrastructure is designed properly with the proper checkpoints in place. But the capability to have your own instances of a platform within the four walls of your own company is important too, if that's a part and parcel of how you run your business. So you might want to make sure as you're looking for an IoT platform that opportunity is available to you as well. If I don't trust the cloud and I want to have my own instance, can I do that? So that's something else to take into account in selecting a platform. From a standpoint of kind of reviewing what we've said, the main things that we wanted to kind of leave you with in the discussion of making versus buying is, an IoT platform is not a casual implementation or a casual investment. It's going to take significant time, significant cost, and resource to do that. The next slide is actually one that was put together by one of our customers just recently, and they had actually internally done an analysis of what it was going to take for them to build their own platform. And this is a larger scale customer, planned for literally hundreds of thousands of endpoints. But you can see they basically associate it with, do we want to build a car or do we want to buy the car and just drive and allow us to focus on our business rather than, first off, having the delay to get to market and the time it's going to take us to build it, but secondly, deal with all the complexities, not only at the upfront development, but also in the long-term maintenance, enhancement, and updates of the framework. So that, I think, is a pretty good visual perspective of of something you might want to consider too as you start down that path towards your solution. By focusing, by purchasing a platform platform, it really frees you to focus on what your business is. For the developers, they can focus on new features for your users. What type of user interface is better? What kind of data do they really need to have? It's all about driving value, back to the business. From a standpoint of the managers, there's not a manager out there that doesn't look at the man hours of the resource that they have, and they're always trying to get more, time out of those resources. So rather than having them tied up, building the plumbing for the house, you worry about just purchasing the fixtures and not having to worry about how the house is plumbed. So it allows them to focus on what they need to do, and of course get to market quicker. And then finally, for the executives, it's all always about where are resources being most effectively used, and how do we minimize our risks as we go forward in the marketplace, from a corporate perspective, and make sure that we have satisfied customers taking advantage of our solution and recommending it to others. So that's, from a high level, kind of where it sits. This next slide is a little bit of, I guess, a visual, but it's a little bit of a reality too, in the standpoint that IoT is a journey. It is not something that you do for a few months and then it's done with and it just magically yields benefits. And you want to have fellow travelers and partners go with you on that journey. You don't want to start down a barren road into a barren land to build your own. I think there's very few scenarios where that makes business sense. I think most likely you're going to want to work with people who have experience, who have the architectural knowledge on how to build a city, the IoT city, if you will, how to be able to get the information and value into it and out of it as quickly as possible. So, that's, just a simple little perspective to wrap that up. Clearly what we want to do is work with you and let you get to know Telit better and how Telit can help you. We're going to show you a couple of ways to do that. One is our upcoming IoT Innovation Summit in Barcelona in early October. That will be a full-day event where we will have executives, development team there. We'll have hands-on workshops and breakout sessions where you can come and better understand not only our platform but all of our componentry, from data services to devices to how do we better integrate sensors. All of those types of things will be there available to you at the Innovation Summit, and this is an opportunity to have a 25% discount on it with the IoT 17 webinar code. And then also coming up is an offer that we'll make available to you as well that you need to schedule by the end of August, but you can execute on it later. It's available at telit.com 4-for-1, and it's the opportunity to effectively get what we call a 4-in-1 consulting offer. Effectively, you pay for an hour of consulting, and we provide 4 hours of it. And you get to talk with senior members of our services team whose life is daily to be architecting and deploying IoT-based solutions for our customers on a global basis. So some of you may want to take advantage of that to possibly kickstart your efforts and at least get an idea of how quickly could I onboard something. If I'm going to develop a device, how do I most effectively do that? And if I'm going to connect it into my legacy systems or my, my business systems, how do I do that? So that could be a very good, investment of money there as well moving forward. So I think we're to the question and answer session. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Kim.
I think we are.
So
I think we are. Folks, don't be afraid to continue submitting questions. If you think of any as we go, we're going to get to as many as we can here. And so let's jump right in. Our first question here asks, what do you consider a platform? Would a cloud solution such as Azure or AWS count? I know this is a really broad question, but do your best.
No. It's definitely a platform. We have great respect for the frameworks that Azure provides and Amazon provides with AWS, and obviously IBM provides with Watson. I mean, they're absolutely world-class infrastructures for large-scale data analytics. But what we also recognize is the fact that they have things they do well, and that we have things that we do well, and many times you need the capability to manage your devices, to keep those devices running, to perform the edge management that's required there, whether it's FODA, application over the air, etc. And those are the types of things that many times lead to hybrid deployments, where the Telit infrastructure, our platform, will be used for all of your front-end management, your device management, things of that nature, and then in a very high performance manner, we do a cloud-to-cloud integration with Azure or AWS, so that you can benefit from their event stream processing, their big data analytics, things of that nature. So there's no one size fits all or a single answer there, depending on the scale of your solution. Many times it makes sense to have multiple platforms working for you.
And that makes a lot of sense. Sticking with the platform question for a moment, one of our questioners here says that they're new to the Telit platform and would like you to sort of differentiate and compare yourself to other platforms and sort of what would be some of the differences and similarities.
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, if you know Telit and our history, we have a very strong and successful hardware heritage that we're very proud of. The capabilities to start from a module level and grow, I think, is very important. If we look at the platform, the fact that we integrated, connectors to the platform directly into the Telit module sets and products, so that it makes it very easy to onboard, is very important. But also, once you get into the platform itself, the capability to manage those endpoints that are, as I referenced earlier, the capability to support logic both at the edge or logic at the cloud level on a more of a, I would say, what we would consider a multi-tenant or organizational level, where you may have thousands of devices coming in that need to have the same types of logic applied to them, the capability to do that very easy in a visual manner in the cloud, the capability to manage each one of those things. A component of our platform is called the Thing Manager. It allows you to list the things associated with your particular organization, and we have a multi-tenant framework and the concept of the multi-tenancy as an organization. So each of those organizations would have your things associated with it, the ability to effectively drill down at a very high resolution into those devices is of great value, and also the capability to apply security rules to each of those devices as well. We have the capability to support security tagging and identification of roles for users that effectively say, this user or this device has the capability to do this, or this, but not this, or that. And those are the types of things I think that you see from a maturity level in our platform that many others haven't, built into theirs at this point in time.
Awesome. To shift gears just a little bit, I've got a question about security. One of our listeners wanted to know how security works with hardware identification or ID when Telit does the handover to the customer, and how that how the safety of that handover works, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Okay. I'll take a stab at it. If it's not the right context of the question, then maybe we can take another pass so they can refine their question. But, obviously there's different levels of identification at an endpoint. An endpoint device may have a unique identifier that the customer wishes to use. Maybe, in the terms of vehicles, it's very often a VIN number. In the context of a, small footprint device, it can be, a serial number that's associated with that device that's hard burnt into the into the chipset when it's made, or it could be something as basic as the IMEI of the physical module itself, or the ICC ID of the SIM. We're really working to go beyond that to where we have immutable identifications within the modules as well, so that when that module is provisioned, it is something that cannot change and will not change throughout the life of that component of hardware. And that's really handled, I would say, at a little bit lower level within the context of the authentication and provisioning. I would say it's in the plumbing as that process of provisioning goes, where the device is first connected to the cloud. There's the handshake with the cloud to say, I wish to have access. You saw the multi-factor authentication that we talked about in the presentation. When you provision a device or a set of devices, for cloud connection, we have the concept of an application token, which is something that device has to know. So when it goes to do its first handshake with the cloud, if it cannot provide a known app token, it's not going to be allowed access. But once it's allowed access, then it goes to a lower level to validate that the identification of that device, is valid. And there's technology that, we have, today, and technology that we're working on to refine to more effectively do that, to prevent any type of aliasing or spoofing of those endpoint devices. Now, I don't know if that answered the question or not, but that at a high level, that's pretty much what I would answer it as.
Yeah, I think you probably did, and even if not, it was great information. So we win both ways. Our next question here is very high level. It's sort of looking for your thoughts on the industry at large, I think. Where are enterprises sort of operating today? Are they looking primarily at greenfields? Are they managing and migrating legacy? Are they looking to integrate everything? Sort of, what's the sort of state of the industry in terms of where we're looking to grow?
Well, I think it kind of, I would say industry as a whole, most of the time industry has responsibility to the stockholders, so they're kind of responsible about the path and the velocity at which they take, but they range kind of across the board. I would say no single enterprise customer that we deal with is out to boil the ocean. They're being very responsible on how they move forward. I would say that most enterprise companies out there today have some type of IoT strategic plan that they're working toward. Now, where that happens to be something as basic as how do we more effectively connect devices in our factory to more efficiently produce product, all the way to, as we build our next generation of products and we're putting microcontrollers in them for the first time, how do we make sure we have an infrastructure to manage those devices, once they get into the distribution, the sales point, and the customer's, final, properties. So how do we physically go about doing that? It really ranges in scale, both ways. I think customers typically, have a plan. One of the first things we do, and I'll kind of answer this a little bit, they will have a plan. I think more often than not, they don't necessarily know what they don't know. And a lot of times, upfront discussion and consulting is the best thing they can do. And, we typically offer our strategic enterprise customers time to come to our university, the device have time to come to Boca and sit down for a consulting session to help them get to that next level. What is the next right step? Because it always makes sense when you're taking on something the scale of IoT to take that first step, like I said, the crawl, the walk, the run, and go about it that way. So I guess that's a little bit of a long answer to a somewhat short question, but it really, just really runs the gamut in the context of enterprises today.
And as we're getting near the end of time here, I think we've got time for one more question. And the question is about application integration, which you talked a little bit about, and whether or not you're referring specifically to APIs. But I also was hoping you can broaden that a little bit and talk about some of the different methods of application integration that you guys work on and you find most advantageous for your clients?
Oh, absolutely. But you got to be careful never to ask a watch builder what time it is. You might have to find out how to build a watch, but never what time it is. So anyhow, one of the most powerful features I think of our platform, what we've invested in literally, for the last 20 plus years of our platform, development, and it predated the whole concept of Ventim and IoT, was enterprise integration. Our heritage from the platform team was very much within the context of mission critical manufacturing operations, all of which typically involved tightly integrating to enterprise systems from SAP, from IBM, from Oracle, these large-scale systems and getting the data there. And I think one of the strongest features that we have in terms of enterprise integration is, not only do we provide the basic support for RESTful APIs that are very common in integration today, or for classic, web services, if it's a SOAP XML implementation, things of that nature, but we actually have, native protocol adapters that are literally, drag, drop, point, and click in nature that allows you to say, I want to take this element of data from my, IoT device at endpoint, and I want to put it into this business API import field in SAP, or into this, message field in, WebSphere MQ from IBM, or for this, enterprise service bus message on Oracle Fusion. I mean, the capability, or into this field in my Salesforce, .com Force API, the capability to do that and allow a person to do it with effectively no programming required, I think is one of the strongest features that we have for enterprise integration, and we've seen that over and over.
Yeah, and that's
Go ahead.
I think that sort of ease of use and facility to customization is really one of the strengths of what you guys are working with there. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, so I'm going to direct our listeners here. First of all, thank you very much, John. This was really informative and really great. And make sure everybody out there checks out the URL that we've just brought up on your screen, telit.com/4, FOR1, 441, to find out more about these programs and the 441 deal that John talked about right before we got into the Q&A. Thanks again, John. Folks, remember, you can access this presentation in its entirety in our archive, which you'll be getting a link to after the fact. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thanks again, John Keever, for filling us in on some of the great work that you guys have been doing in platforming and everything else that you guys do.
Thank you, Ken.
And I think that about wraps us up. Thank you, folks.